Hey everyone, on the workbench today we have this Fender Super 112. I fixed this amp a couple of months ago when I bought it really cheap, secondhand and malfunctioning on eBay. I got it working, however, one of the things I didn't fix was the pilot light. Now, I don't even remember if it was an LED or if it was an actual pilot light, but since this is a tube amp, it may just be a 6.5 or 6.3 mil little bulb. Let's open her up and have a look. Alright, so what I've done is I've taken the screws off the top of the amp cabinet here, and this is what they look like. These things here. These little plate with the two long screws, they screw down straight into the chassis. I already took the back plate off. What I've also done is undone the speaker wire, remembering the polarity. So on the speaker wire here, the negative is on the left-hand side and the positive, the white wire, is on the right-hand side. I've also undone the spring reverb. Sorry about being very dark down here, but the red RCA cable goes on the left and the black RCA cable goes on the right. When it comes time to putting the amp back together, if you have forgotten which is which, write it down. Okay, let's continue. I'll pull the chassis out and stick it on top of the cabinet, and then we'll have a look at what's going on inside. And I'll also show you the previous repairs I did as well and talk you through it. Stay tuned. Something I forgot about from last time. There's Phillips screws on the chassis. I think there's 2 or 3. And it's hard to see in here. My apologies. There's another one. Got to undo those first too before the chassis can come out. Hang on a sec. Okay, now that I've taken the amp or the chassis out of the cabinet, I can show you my previous repairs. I'll bring you around to the front of the amp here. Now, when I bought this, the person who was selling it complained that there was no sound coming out of the preamp at all. In other words, when you connected your guitar or your instrument into the 2 input jacks or either of the input jacks, nothing happened. However, if you went around the back of the amp and you plugged into power amp in, you would get sound, which means the power tubes or that side of the circuit was working fine. However, the preamp tubes weren't doing anything. Now, when I opened this up, I found some already existing repairs, i.e. these resistors. These resistors actually belong on the bottom. However, seeing as this amp has been repaired before, the resistors have been put on, well, the bottom of the circuit board because the circuit board's upside down. Let's get the orientation right. Circuit board is upside down. These resistors belong on top, underneath, in this case. So what actually happens is that the previous repairer, who knows what they're doing, has put these resistors on the bottom of the circuit board, easier access. I believe each one of these go to pin 1. That one up here, if you follow the tracks, goes to pin 1. If we look at this one here, that's directly connected to pin 1. And then this one here, a little bit different, but essentially they're all connecting to pin 1. At least that's what it looks like according to this. I haven't got a schematic, but it doesn't matter because what I did, and you'll notice there's a jumper going to this, and then this resistor used to connect to that point right there, but this entire track has lifted and disappeared, probably due to heat. So these resistors, especially that one, I've lifted up off the circuit board. You can see how much higher they are. And the other 2 I've lifted up as well. So there's a couple of millimeters of a gap between the resistor and the circuit board because these get hot. Okay, speaking of getting hot, if we look at this one here, you'll actually see, and let me see if I can focus in on this, you'll actually see some brown marks around the circuit board. Let's see if we can see any around here. Not so much, but a little bit of discoloration. And this one, I mean, there was massive damage. The whole track here had completely lifted. If we also look at some other parts of the circuit board, you'll see it's a bit brown around here. It's a bit brown around here. Up here it's a bit brown around here. There's a huge giant resistor under here. It's a bit brown under that. Now, I can't be bothered pulling all of this apart to repair and remedy all that stuff. Not right now anyway, because the amp is still working and the majority of the problems have gone away. The problem I'm fixing today is the little pilot light here is not working. We're going to troubleshoot why, whether it's a blown LED or whether it's a bad connection. Now, if we follow the connection, we have a white. Let's focus in here. A white and a red wire goes in under the power switches. Looks like it's been possibly repaired before. There's heat shrink on these wires, and the wires follow and go to here. So first thing I want to do is I'm going to plug the speaker back into the amp because I'm going to turn it on and I don't want my output transformer to blow. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the amp on and I'm going to measure if there's any voltage coming out of these pins. If there is any voltage, and it's probably about 1 to 2 volts maximum, then that light in there, the LED, should turn on. What I am going to do right now though, and I'm going to need both hands, is I'm going to take that plastic off just now, or I should say after I test if there's any voltage coming out of these. And if there is, then there's something wrong here. So let me put this down, stay tuned, and I'll come back with more. Alrighty, so what I thought I'd do before I start pulling things apart is test this LED out and see if there's any continuity to the wires that are connected to the circuit board at these points here. What I've done is I've set my multimeter to the continuity test or the diode test. It does both at the same time. The good thing about being a diode test, it also sends a little bit of voltage to the LED and it will turn it on. Now, normally, if you have a closed circuit, you'll get that beeping sound and it'll short. However, if I can zoom in, see the LED lighting? Okay, now what I'm doing is I've got the negative terminal connected to the negative, and my positive probe is touching the positive terminal of the LED, and it's turning the LED on. Okay, so the LED is not the problem, it's something else. Time to look at the rest of this circuit and we'll figure out what's going on. Let's have a look. I go and test the next part of this circuit by placing the probes on these 2 points here. Now from these 2 points it goes to another circuit, and it does that through this little ribbon cable. Now if I push this ribbon cable down far enough, you'll actually see that it's not connected to anything. So the good news the good news is, hooray, I've got to take all these bolts off and I've got to remove this whole entire control panel. All these knobs, there's going to be bolts underneath it, probably 10 or 12 mil, probably 12 mil. Okay, input jacks, foot switch, I believe, for, I don't know what the foot switch does, probably changes channels. And, hooray, I'm going to have to figure out how to resolder this back onto there, and the LED should start working. Good news is LED works. Bad news, it's much easier to replace an LED. But hey, fun times ahead replacing this, or getting this all out just to solder in these little pins. Good news, I jiggled things around a bit and I was able to get better access to the board without having to undo this big one down here. Good news is I was able to look in underneath it enough to see that this ribbon on the left here actually does connect to these 2 points. Now what I'm going to do, the contacts on this ribbon cable have broken clean off, so I'm not going to be able to solder them back in place where they belong. However, what I am going to do is do what I originally thought. I'm going to bend this ribbon over and solder it on top. Let's get a better view of that. Let's get a better view with some focus. Hey, this ribbon is going to bend over and solder to those 2 pins there. Now I'm going to try to see if I can do this while keeping the camera rolling, and be with you in a second. Okay, so first things first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-tin these sockets, or these little ribbon cable bits that are sticking out here, the terminals. I'm going to pre-solder those. I'm going to tin them, is what the actual proper name is. That way when I put them down onto these 2 pads here, they're going to stick as best as possible. In fact, what I'm also going to try to do is maybe even remove these old pads here, because if I solder these and push them through, they're going to fall out and flop around in the chassis and probably short something out, because they'll move around during transport. Got this nifty little turkey baster, also known as a solder sucker. You push this end down, it's got a little rubber diaphragm in here. You heat up your solder joint. Sorry, you'll have to excuse me, I've got a cold right now, so my voice is horrible and I'm sniffling. Apologies for people who have a aversion to blowing their nose and also clearing their throat. So I'm going to heat up these solder joints here, these ones down here, and the solder sucker, I'll press this button and it will, excuse the noise, wasn't so bad, it will release the spring, this spring here, it'll release it and sucks up the diaphragm, which will suck up all the solder while it's still hot and melted. So let's try the first pin here. It's all nicely heated up, and so I don't know if you can see that, but that solder is pretty much all gone. And in fact, I may have sucked the pin up. I might have to check my solder sucker and see what I find. There's something shaking inside here. You can actually undo these and clean them out, which I'll do later. Now I've reset the solder sucker, so I'm just going to do the same thing on the other point. Heat up the solder joint, get in there, and suck that solder out. That pin's stuck around. Wonder if I can just keep the soldering iron on there and pull that pin off. Let's have a look. Yes, there we go. So the pin is right there. Let's discard that into the bin. Now I'm going to grab a little bit of solder. I'm going to tin the ends of this, and I'm going to put some extra solder onto those solder pads there. I'm just going to do it quickly, because the other problem with circuit boards, circus boards, is too much heat and the tracks start lifting, which is probably what happened with these other repairs on the resistors. Okay, so what I did right now while I was talking is I just pre-tinned those pads and pre-tinned the pads on there. I'm going to clean my soldering iron tip, because you always want a good clean tip, nothing but the tip. Now the fun part is bending this piece down. I'm going to try it this way. It's always about the angle of the dangle. And what I want to do is heat up that joint and heat up the other joint, and hopefully they look like they're shorting out. Hopefully you get the multimeter and you test out if they're shorting out or not. Guess what? That's not going to work because I've shorted it out. Now I'm going to grab some tweezers instead. Let's see if we can do a little bit more finer work here. Clean the tip again. Okay, no more shorting out. In theory, I should be able to turn this amp back on, and the LED should work. In fact, I'm so confident, I'm going to half put the amp back together, turn it on, and see what happens. And if that LED works, I've done a damn good job. Stay tuned. Fucking circuit boards. Don't you love them? So I was putting this PCB back into its place before I screwed it down, getting all cocky about being confident, and this whole thing ripped off. It ripped the solder pads right off the circuit board. You gotta love PCBs. This is why they're crap. All this cable is doing is connecting these two to these two, which are running along this circuit board to these two. In theory, if I rip this out and I unsolder the two leads coming from the LED and I resolder them straight to here, I should be okay. Then again, you keep soldering all this crap, and what's eventually going to happen is you're just going to lift up every single track on this stupid piece of shit. Alright, so what I've done so far is I've snipped the bare end of this ribbon cable that's completely useless and it would be flopping around and shorting out. I've extended the wires of these LEDs, or the LED wire coming from the LED, and it's going to get soldered straight to these two pins here. What I've done first is also put heat shrink on, something not to forget about because I've extended the wires. Okay, I've resoldered those wires back in like I said. I've put the bolts back onto these, put them in place. I haven't put the knobs back on. Here's the famous LED not working. Now, I haven't put this all back together yet because I may have to pull it apart and do some more work. But let's flick the wire on, let's flick the power switch on and see if I've connected the wires around the right way. And this LED should turn on. Hey, look at that. It works. Tune in next time for more amp repairs. And don't forget to subscribe.